first question time of the new year.
Good evening. For our first programme of 2025, we've come to Northampton. It's roughly halfway between Birmingham and London and has a long history as the shoemaking capital of Europe. Its two constituencies flipped from Conservative blue to Labour red in last year's election. In the last few hours, our local audience members have been arriving, preparing their questions and thoughts for our panel. And as a group, as usual, they reflect the general electoral picture across the nation. Tonight, they want to ask, why are patients dying in hospital corridors? Is Elon Musk our friend or foe? And when, if ever, will Labour's plan for the economy start to work? Welcome to Question Time. Is Sir Chris Bryant. He's a government minister in the Technology and Culture Department and has been an MP since 2001. Before that, he had a variety of jobs, most notably as an Anglican priest. He's also written several books, including a biography of Parliament. Nadine Dorries was the Conservative Culture Secretary under Boris Johnson. She resigned when Liz Truss became PM and has since left Parliament. She too is a writer, first of many novels and now of accounts of her time in politics, as well as a weekly Daily Mail column. Making his Question Time debut is Calum Miller. He's one of the new intake of Liberal Democrat MPs and speaks for the party on foreign affairs. He previously worked as a civil servant with Nick Clegg when he was Deputy Prime Minister. Aisha Hazarika is a Times radio presenter and also hosts a podcast scrutinising the Labour government. She worked for the party as an advisor to then-leader Ed Miliband and is now in the House of Lords, having been nominated by Keir Starmer. And Liam Halligan is an economist and journalist. He worked in think tanks and at the International Monetary Fund before becoming a journalist for the Financial Times and Channel 4. Till last year, he was economics editor at GB News and now writes and podcasts for The Telegraph. Welcome to our panellists, welcome to our audience here in Northampton, of course, welcome to you at home. And before we get started with our questions, I just wanted to say that over the Christmas period, one of our long-serving and, in fact, founding editor of Question Time, Barbara Maxwell, died. Now, she was, as I say, a founding editor. Here she is, we can see a picture of her. It's in the late 1970s. She's in the middle of the picture with her all-female production team. This picture actually is 1982. She's working with our first presenter, Sir Robin Day. Remember him? Absolutely. Absolutely brilliant at this job. And over 40 years later, here we are, walking in Barbara's footsteps every week. So we send our condolences to Barbara's family and her friends. And I'm sure if Barbara were here, she would wish us to crack on with the programme. So that's what we'll do. Let's take our first question from Matt Dimes.
Hi there. And so a hospital in London is advertising for corridor nurses. What is being done about the crisis in the NHS?
So, yes, there's a hospital in North London, it's the Whittington, I think, that's advertising for nurses, and in the notes to the advert it says corridor care. And then, of course, we've had this report from the Royal College of Nursing with horrific stories of care in A&E. People dying in corridors, miscarrying, not in wards, being left in soiled clothes for hours on end. What's being done about the crisis in A&E, Chris?
We've got to fix the NHS from top to bottom. It's not just about money, though it's partly about money, and that's why we're putting in £22.5 million extra. But it's not just about that. It's reform. There's some waste in the system. We've got to make sure that people can get the appointments that they need. And it's all the way through from primary care, so when you go to the GP, all the way through to acute care. We tend to focus most on the hospitals in our NHS system. We've got to shift that. I think social care is an issue that we're going to have to deal on a cross-party basis. We've had far too many attempts by different governments, a Labour government and then a Conservative government. All these attempts to solve the social care crisis in the UK have foundered because politicians haven't cooperated, and that's what we've got to do, and that's what Wes Streeting has said we're going to do in this Parliament.
So how soon do you think our audience here,
sorry,
watching
Fiona,
at home...
can I just go back?
No, let me just ask you, how soon do you think... Because the question is about corridor care nurses, that's what prompted it.
Yeah.
How soon do you think the people in the audience here and people watching at home could expect to be treated in A&E in a manner that is both dignified and appropriate?
I think it's going to take a whole Parliament. And this is why... Sorry, Fiona, but I do want to go back to this point about it is all the different bits connect. If too many people are going to A&E because they can't go to their GP, then that's part of the problem that we've got in A&E. I know that locally from my own patch in Wales, and I should say this isn't a party political issue. It's exactly the same in Wales as it is in England, and Wales has an older population and a sicker population, so we've got some of these problems are more exacerbated there than they are anywhere else. But we've got to train enough GPs. We've got to have an efficient system of using GP services. We've got to get more things being done by your local pharmacy that historically were done by GPs. And it's that whole pattern. And, of course, the other bit you've got to do is you've just got to get more doctors seeing more patients. Right. You've got to have 7 days a week. I would use every single part of the private sector, buy that in, to use it free at the point of delivery for to get all those patient services seen.
But as you say, we can't realistically expect an improvement until the end of this Parliament. That's quite a long time for people to wait.
Well, no, you asked me a very specific question, which is when will it all be sorted? Of course, there will be improvements.
No, I asked you about A&E, and when could people expect dignified and appropriate care in A&E? And you said by the end of the Parliament. Well, so that's about 4 years.
Well, what I'm saying is that this is a whole Parliament project. Sure. We're not going to be able to transform the whole of the... We've got a 7 million people backlog in the NHS in England alone. And incidentally, before COVID, there was a 4.8 million people backlog. We've had 14 years, I'm afraid, of not caring for the NHS, and now we have got to put it right. It is our historic duty to do that because we owe it to the British people. OK, well, Nadine, let me bring you in. I appreciate you are no longer a parliamentarian. You obviously were in government, and you were a health minister, actually, of course.
I was health minister 2 years, yeah.
And also a former nurse, exactly. So Matt's question is about the crisis in the NHS, specifically the crisis in A&E.
So I agree with one point Chris made about the deep and fundamental problems that we have in the NHS. And they actually go back, Chris, over a number of governments, including the PFI contracts, which were brought in under the last Labour government, which saw many hospitals closed down. I just want to give you an interesting fact, and this is from the King's Fund, which I learnt today. So in 1987, we had 250,000 hospital beds, and we had a population of 55 million. Today, we only have 140,000 hospital beds, and we have a population of 68 million.
So why do you think the Conservatives didn't open more hospitals and put more beds in then?
We actually came in 2019 with a
14 years you had
manifesto to open 20 new hospitals, which were opposed at every stage by the Labour opposite when they were in opposition at that time.
They weren't new hospitals and they weren't hospitals.
But can I just say, some of them were new hospitals, Chris, and some of them were extensions to existing hospitals, which would have increased the number of hospital beds. But there are, if I can just get to the substantive point, there are a number of issues. One is workforce. And we have far fewer people today who actually even want to train as nurses, and workforce is a massive issue. The other, and one of the things Wes Streeting will have discovered as soon as he walked in to the Department of Health was that he has almost no levers of power that he can pull over the NHS. Because years ago in 2012, we made the NHS almost independent to move it away from government so that it wasn't a government football, so that it wasn't a political football.
Are you talking about the Andrew Lansley reforms?
The Lansley reforms, yeah. I do want to bring, because it's a long time ago and people may not remember them, but 2012 we brought in the Lansley reforms, and that gave the NHS almost total independence. So he has that, which is the reason why this new incoming Labour government have just given them a huge dollop of money with no deliverables, no answerable terms in which they can spend that money. We just dropped it into the black hole of the NHS. And I'm afraid the NHS, that is one of the problems. Money just sinks into the NHS with very little say for the government over where it's spent and what is delivered for that money. And that is fundamentally a deep problem.
Look to the woman in the middle with the sort of mustard-coloured jacket on, yes.
I think I agree with Chris. This is a much more fundamental issue, and no one will run their personal business the way the NHS is being run. There's a lot of wastage. I know they keep saying it's only a little bit of wastage. There's a lot of wastage. But I think more fundamental is that we need to allow people, educate people to take personal responsibility. This starts even beyond the GP setting. You know, there are many things people can do, and I think that's where the emphasis should be on.
For their own health,
For their own health, well-being, you know, diet, exercise, all those natural healing methods. There are a lot of natural healing methods that are approved and proven. that's where it needs to start from, the education and the sensitization, so that when people on a community basis take charge of their own health, then less things kind of flow down into the GPs and the hospitals. So we keep pointing fingers. It needs to be a collective and long-term view.
Man there, and I think you've got a black cap on, I think. Yeah.
So I'm a care manager for the council and I work for the hospital team, and my whole job is to get people out of hospital and put in care packages in place to help support them to be at home or in residential care. And I'm on that front line of actually seeing how much this is. People are staying in hospital beds for longer period of times than they actually need to because they're medically fit to leave. And I think that we've got to seriously push the point on funding adult social care properly, especially in community settings as well, because I just don't think that's looked at. And I think NHS, which is amazing, and I completely support it, but it's the right hand and the left hand.
So the government's introduced a plan that should come to fruition or will report back in 3 years' time.
Yes.
On social care. Are you impressed by that?
It sounds interesting. I just want to hear where the substance is behind that. It does sound quite exciting because actually there's a talk around actually really looking at social care. So it does sound interesting.
Let me just take one more point before I come to it. Yes, this man there with the green shirt and the white t-shirt. Yeah.
I'd just like to know where the workers are going to come from. With the Conservatives, when they introduced stopping carers bringing dependents from overseas, I think that's a big thing that can stop people wanting to come here. And also, what is the appeal of people wanting to actually get into the NHS when it's such a crisis? But also, we've got people moving abroad once they've been trained in the UK for better pay, moving to Australia. How do we then keep the people that we've trained in our universities to work in our NHS?
OK. Liam?
Well, we like to think, don't we, that the NHS is the best in the world. We say it all the time. But guess what? We all know in our heart that it isn't. We all like free at the point of use, which is a principle that's adhered to in many other healthcare systems, particularly in continental Europe. And we have much to learn from continental Europe, I would say. But the reality is, ladies and gentlemen, and we don't like to talk about it, but when you look at the table of OECD countries, they're the 30 most advanced industrialised countries, certainly in the Western world, we are at or near the bottom when it comes to health outcomes, and lots of you are nodding, when it comes to heart disease, strokes and oncology, cancer, the three main causes, unfortunately, of death. I'd like to say that the Labour Party, I'm glad the Labour Party, Wes Streeting, we've just heard it from Chris, is now saying we do need to reform the NHS. No mainstream politician is saying that we want to get rid of free at the point of use. We have to be able to have a proper political conversation without everybody completely freaking out that... and let me finish. And, of course, we have lots to learn from other countries who do it much, much better than us. And A&E, Fiona, is a symptom of that. To the young man's point over there, foreign workers. We're in a fantastic school here. I'm proud to be a governor of a couple of schools, so I know that there are many, many, many young people with superb A-level results who cannot get a place at medical school. That is mad. Why aren't we training more doctors? We desperately need to do that. I'd also like to say that the NHS is suffering, particularly at the moment, not necessarily from a lack of money. Of course, we need a steady stream of money, but we are roughly average in terms of OECD countries in terms of NHS funding. But I would like to say that lockdown was a disaster for the NHS. We became a COVID-only service. Again, lots of you are nodding. That meant that many people weren't screened for cancer and other conditions, and so we've got this overhang now. The waiting list is headlined at 7 million in England, as Chris said. Actually, I know from my journalistic investigations, many emails that I get from members of the public, it's nearer 8 or 9 million because there are waiting lists to get on the waiting lists to get on the waiting lists. It's a really, really complex problem, but I'm glad we're seeing at least the beginning of a proper political debate about this. We have to not say the NHS is the best in the world, despite the fact that lots of people work in it do a great job. But lots of people who work in it don't do a great job. They're out for themselves. Again, lots of you are nodding. There you go. We have to have a grown-up conversation. It is literally a matter of life and death.
Man here in the front of the glass.
I agree with most of what you said, but don't forget, consistently governments over the years have eroded beds, right? They've shut beds down because they can't afford to keep them running. And I'm afraid to say that that's a product of people wanting to pay lower taxes. If you want good services, yeah, and you want proper services, you've got to pay for them. And you've got to pay for them somehow.
All right. Man in the middle quarterback in the blue jacket, yeah.
So I think until the government stopped scholarships for nurses, I think there was a lot of incentives for young people to go into the medical profession. I don't know what the Labour government is thinking in terms of reviving that to encourage our own people here, young people, to go into the profession to reduce the problem of manpower within the NHS. Coming back to your comment, Chris, I fully understand that, you know, the root and branch review of NHS is going to take a long time. But in terms of contingencies, with regard to the emergencies that are happening, to the extent that, you know, it almost seems like we are now accepting that we can put out an advert and say we need nurses in the corridors. What plans has the government got in terms of, you know, looking at this urgent emergency?
OK, Chris, I'll come back to you. Calum, let me bring you.
Well, look, thanks, Matt, for the question. And I think I, like every other MP, have every week conversations with members of my constituency who are struggling to access healthcare. Somebody came to see me last weekend, chronic back problem. She'd been in A&E in July on her hands and knees asking for help. She had diagnosis, she needs surgery, and she's still waiting. And in the meantime, she's had to give up her work as a senior secondary teacher because she can't stand up, she can't work. And this is blighting individual people's lives because of these delays. So, you know, we know that the NHS is somewhat in crisis because of the damage done to it by the Conservatives. I have sympathy for the Labour government coming in, trying to deal with that. But I'm also really frustrated and disappointed that Labour is not getting on with it faster. We in the Liberal Democrats have been promoting cross-party working on social care, and I really welcome Chris saying that they're up for that. What I just don't understand is why it needs to take 3 years. Way back a decade ago, Andrew Dilnot reported, sensible report is a strong basis for cross-party communications. We would love to get into a room, have a conversation with Labour and hopefully our Conservative colleagues as well this year and start to make a change on social care, because social care, as the gentleman who works in the sector said earlier, social care is holding up people from leaving hospital through the back door. There are 12,000 beds a day being used by people who don't need to be in hospital anymore and could be in social care.
Well, let's just ask Chris, I know there's other things you want to say, but very specifically, why is it taking 3 years?
Well, there's no reason for it to take 3 years. Great. If we could all agree
faster. It's been done, the work's done.
Well, everybody says that, and then the moment
hang on. But
took years.
Wes Treating has said it's going to take 3 years. Why?
Because that's our working assumption on getting a full strategy in place. But look, I mean, it may be that it's possible to get agreement across all the political parties.
But it's there. It was ready to go in September 23 at £1.2 billion a year, a drop in the ocean. It was ready to go, and you decided to call another review, which will take 3 years. It's ready to go in number 10. You could start it tomorrow.
I mean, in fairness, the Conservatives didn't do it either.
No.
But, I mean, let me just point that out. It was ready to go, and you didn't do it either.
It was the first thing Rishi Sunak cancelled when he became Prime Minister.
And you attacked our ideas in one general election, and we attacked yours in another general election. Let's just say we should not attack each other's good ideas. Wouldn't that be just a good start?
We'll start with that,
Aisha. Let me bring Aisha, then I'll come.
Well, look, I mean, you're just seeing why the issue of social care, you know, does become so political, and it is really important to try and kind of, you know, get some cross-party consensus on this, because Calum is right. You cannot fix the NHS if you don't fix social care, to your point there. And,
in fact, the Royal College of Nursing was pointing out in its report that social care is a key reason why the crisis in A&E is so
I think the thing with social care as well, it's just more than the beds that are being taken up. Every single person in the audience tonight, pretty much everybody watching at home tonight, will be navigating the social care service themselves, trying to battle their way through the system for a vulnerable relative or, you know, for an elderly parent. I know at least 2 people that have had to actually give up work themselves because the social care situation is so bad. So that means the economy is then losing out. So we've got to... I mean, I think Louis' case is a brilliant person, but let's hope we can kind of expedite this. But look, lots of things can be true at the same time. The NHS is absolutely in crisis. Chris is right. You do have to join up the dots between all the different parts. Yes, a lot of money went into the NHS just after COVID, but there has been systemic, chronic underinvestment in the NHS for a long time. You look at things like the crumbling state of a lot of our hospitals, you look at some of how outdated the equipment is, and to your point, to the gentleman's point about staffing, there's no point putting all of this new money into the NHS when staff are leaving in droves. That's like putting, water into a bath, but there's not a plug. And a really important point as well that the lady first comment made is we are all going to have to think more about our health. We're in a situation in Britain where we're living longer, but we're living sicker. We have got so many different issues. Now, some of that can be lifestyle. Look at something like diabetes. Diabetes is on the rise. I've, people close to me in my life who are special osteopaths. They are, or they're consultants in... one of the biggest operations they're doing is amputations because of diabetes. And these are not older people. These are actually people in their midlives. So we collectively as a country have got to, understand health, because we don't have a national health service at the moment. We've got a national sickness service.
All right. I'm going to move on because I want to get other questions in as well. Forgive me, Chris. So let me just, before I take our next question, I just want to tell you about next week, because we will be in Stockport in Greater Manchester. The week after that, we're in Melton Mowbray in Leicestershire. So Stockport, Melton Mowbray, if you live in or around either area, apply to the Question Time website if you'd like to come and be part of our audience, and we would love to see you. We will no doubt come back to the NHS, so I'm just going to leave it there for the moment, take our next question, which is from Lorraine Andrews-Miller. Off you go.
Is Elon Musk a friend or foe of the UK?
Elon Musk, we've had quite a lot from him recently. A few groans from the audience. Nadine, friend or foe of the UK?
Oh, definitely friend. Well, it was, as you saw today, the Home Secretary announced that she's going to run an inquiry into grooming gangs, a number of inquiries in a number of towns. There is no way that the pressure that Elon Musk has been applying over the last few weeks for that didn't play into that decision. And, Elon Musk, I read somewhere this week that he's the most successful and the richest man in the world, and not only wants to save the planet, wants a planet in reserve, a backup planet, and it's even making progress towards getting to Mars, which is quite incredible.
So is he a friend of the UK when he calls for Keir Starmer and Jess Phillips to be in prison, when he calls Jess Phillips a rape, genocide apologist?
He's unpredictable. I'm sure
it doesn't
he's
sound.
unpredictable. I'm not saying
you call that friendly.
I'm not saying I'm a fan, but what I would say is that he's a man who is breaking down barriers. Chris was talking a moment ago about before we came on air, I think, about mobile phones and broadband coverage, and it's a lot of Elon Musk satellites that are flying around that are providing us with. He broke down those barriers of technology, and he will still continue to do so. And I think that he is part of. He's part of. We can't erase him. We can't get rid of him. He's going to be there, and he's going to be commenting on what happens in politics.
No, but we can have a view on what he says, and you're regarding him as a friend. When he says America should liberate, he put out a poll asking, should America liberate the people of Britain from their tyrannical government? Is that a friend of the UK?
Look, I think it's fair to say he's a disruptor also, and he isn't a fan of this government. I read with dismay last weekend that in the Mail on Sunday that he's actually in cahoots with Dominic Cummings, who is also a disruptor, who isn't successful like Elon Musk has been. But, he's there. He's going to be in the White House. He's going to be a Trump advisor. He's going to be passing commentary on the UK. We can take it or leave it. He's not a minister in the UK. He's not a politician in the UK. But I think he adds to the general discourse, and I think a lot of what he says is worth listening to. And on grooming gangs, he was absolutely right.
Chris, friend or foe?
Well, if he's... Well, I first of all think that the people who should decide how this country is run are the British people, not anybody else.
Still have an opinion.
And incidentally, I apply that as much to Elon Musk as I would apply it to Vladimir Putin, who I think historically has interfered in our elections in the past as well. I think...
Or Barack Obama when he undermined the case for Brexit, Chris? You didn't complain then?
Well, actually, I think that on the whole...
Are we not allowed opinions on other countries?
Well, Barack Obama didn't have much success in that case, did he?
No, but he tried very hard.
Not very hard. Not very hard, I don't think. On the whole, I think it's best for British people to decide what happens in Britain. If Elon Musk is a friend, if he's a friend, he's a very critical friend. I think the comments he made about Jess Phillips were beyond the pale. There comes a point, and I know Nadine has had an awful lot of horrific abuse over the years, and a lot of women MPs do. It means that lots of women choose not to take part in British politics because they you know, and we've seen that with lots of people choosing not to stand again because of the abuse that they've had. Diane Abbott, for that matter, has had lots of horrific abuse, and I think that adding into that is just downright irresponsible and wrong.
And to Nadine's point, and it's a point been made by others, that the decisions that the government has made about grooming gangs and calling for a series of it's not a big national inquiry, but a series of 5 different local inquiries. And Baroness Casey's also looking into social care. Is going to be very busy because she's also looking into grooming as well before she gets on to social care. This was something the government was absolutely adamantly against, and now it's doing it. How much has that to do with Elon Musk?
Well, we've always been in favour of tackling sexual exploitation. In fact,
is the timing purely coincidental?
I think we've had more of a debate because of what he's been engaged in, yeah, but because of what he said. That is certainly true, and I welcome the fact that we're having a debate about it because this is one of the most despicable things that has happened in British society. It's happened for years.
But do you think Yvette Cooper would have been standing up in the House of Commons making the announcement she's making today and also made last week if it wasn't?
Because no, undoubtedly, all of this has been expedited because of the debate that we've had over the last fortnight. Undoubtedly, I'm quite happy to say that. But look, I mean, I think it's good that we're having that debate because, as I say, this is one of the most despicable things that we've seen in British society for years. Whether it's sexual abuse in the family, which is, as we know, unfortunately, the predominant part of sexual abuse of children in this country, or whether it's grooming gangs or whatever it is absolutely despicable, and I want to see justice for those victims. And I think the focus... If I have a real criticism of him, I think he has made this being about the Labour government or whatever. It's actually about the victims. And the more we return to this being about the victims and sorting out justice for them, the better we will do.
Woman there in the top on the glasses, yeah.
Nadine mentioned that Elon Musk is a friend of the UK and also a friend of the environment. He's also the richest man in the world. If he is a friend of the environment, why is he not donating to the victims of the LA wildfires currently?
I'm not sure if you can even begin to answer that question, but...
I don't know if he is or isn't.
Man in the blue shirt there, yes.
Yeah, you say the victims want... That's only going to happen if it's a national inquiry, surely, with the powers to get everybody that's covered this up over the years. I mean, child abuse has gone up 550% in the last 8 years. It's been going on for years. I mean, it's got to be a national inquiry, not just 5 people, 5 towns to look at. It's got to be looked at... It's over 50 towns and villages around the UK, and it needs to go to Scotland and Wales.
Well, sorry to interrupt, Fiona, but one of the things I really want us to do is to get proper data about the ethnicity of all of this. I mean, sometimes people have been putting up figures. I don't know whether they're accurate. That's one of the things that we've announced today. We're going to make sure that we get proper data so that we can tackle the real problems that there are here. Because I want to get to the bottom of every single part of it.
It's £5 million that's been allocated to this. The Telford inquiry alone cost £8 million. It is a drop in the ocean.
And the Telford inquiry was a really good...
And we still don't know whether it's a public inquiry which compels witnesses to come forward legally or an independent inquiry, which is actually what we use a lot in the health service.
Well, what we should have done 11 years ago is introduce mandatory reporting. So if anybody was hiding the fact and covering it up, they should be facing criminal prosecution as well. We could have done that 10 years ago, but unfortunately the previous government refused to adopt that recommendation. recommendation. The Telford
inquiry.
The Telford inquiry was the most successful in bringing forward real recommendations that made a difference in Telford. So, I mean, some of those things are just very simple things to protect young girls into the future. So, for instance, having CCTV in taxis. It seems like a very simple thing, but that came out of the Telford inquiry. That's the model we want to use. Of course, you've got to join up to dots. But the first bill that I sat on when I became an MP in 2003 was the Sexual Offences Bill. We introduced the law on grooming. The first offence on grooming. We introduced the legislation on sexual exploitation of children. I will not bow to anyone in our desire and our determination to investigate and bring justice for the victims.
All right, let me come around the rest of the panel. So the question, Calum, is about Elon Musk. And obviously he's had, as Chris has admitted, a large influence on what's happened in this country in terms of grooming gangs in the last couple of weeks. But the question is Elon Musk a friend or foe to the UK?
So thanks for the question, Lorraine. And I would say that Elon Musk is a threat to the UK. And I think we've talked about a very serious issue in respect to the grooming gangs. I want to talk about the equally serious issue of the health of our democracy. And if we look at how Elon Musk is approaching that in America, I think there are some really big warning signs. We have what you might call oligarchs, like Elon Musk, with huge power, the ability to control information as well as money, who are incredibly close to the incoming president. Somebody else in the panel, I think Nadine has already said that Elon Musk is very unpredictable. We also know that Donald Trump is very unpredictable. It's a threatening environment where the UK needs to respond to that. But where we need to respond to it here is put in place real powers that prevent foreign interference in our politics. So caps on foreign donations to our political parties so that the people who make decisions about how this country is run are electors living in this country, not the richest men in the world living elsewhere in the world.
I mean, certainly Elon Musk, there are reports that Elon Musk has been thinking about donating a serious amount of money to the Reform Party. So you could possibly legislate for that. But what you can't legislate for is someone offering an opinion. And it happens to be the person with the biggest megaphone in the world.
So I think it's really important to distinguish between the opinion, which everybody is entitled to, and the power that somebody who controls a massive social media company has to promote that opinion. And it's about transparency and it's about accountability. Very few of us understand the algorithms, but many of us have seen that since he's taken over X, different things are popping up in our feed, and often that's his opinion. So he's a publisher.
But your former leader went off and worked for Facebook and helped Facebook to do exactly that.
Facebook... And I'm not here to defend decisions that people took, and I'm equally critical of Mark Zuckerberg, who, as we can all see, has kowtowed to Donald Trump, has changed his policies, has introduced alleged community monitoring rather than actual fact-checkers, and has opened up the way for the algorithms and other false information to pollute a public discourse. And I don't think that's a positive step forward, and I think it comes directly from the proximity of the relationship between those who run these huge, profitable social media companies and want to make more money from them and the incoming president of the United States.
Liam.
Well,
Elon Musk, friend or foe?
Well, with all respect to Lorraine and her question, I have to say a lot of this discussion about Elon Musk is pure displacement activity. This whole question, this time on Question Time, the headlines we've seen over recent weeks should have been all about the grooming gang scandals. And
Liam, with respect to you, that's not what Lorraine's question is, and that's how it works on Question Time. So her question is about, is Elon Musk a friend or foe? And he's talked not just about grooming, he's talked about other things as well.
OK, I think complaining about Elon Musk is a bit, and social media and the internet is a bit like sailors complaining about the sea. It is what it is. And the fact that he's from overseas, well, we've had overseas governors of the Bank of England, we've had overseas England football managers. That doesn't bother me. And again, I'm sorry, Fiona, it is displacement activity for us to be arguing about Elon Musk when we should be really drilling down into this grooming gang scandal. We should be calling it the child rape scandal, because that is what it is. We use euphemistic language. We've avoided it for many, many years. You know, talk to brilliant MPs, as I have over many years. People like Anne Cryer, the former Labour MP for Keighley. MPs like Labour's Sarah Champion, the MP for Rotherham. They have tried for many, many years to raise these issues of child rape scandals in many northern towns, many vulnerable young people, and they were rejected by their party and they were ostracised by their party, and that was absolutely outrageous. look, if it takes Elon Musk for us to understand that this is an international scandal and the world is watching and we have to sort it out and we can't be worried about being accused of being politically incorrect, for really grasping these issues and rescuing people who have been abandoned, frankly, by much of the political media class. If it takes Elon Musk to point that out and put pressure on the government, there should be a national inquiry. I personally hope he keeps pushing for a national inquiry. Why won't Labour have a national inquiry? Is it because their current leader was Director of Public Prosecutions during a lot of this period? I am passionate about this. I have 2 daughters. This is an absolutely outrageous thing. Why are we talking about Elon Musk? We should be talking about this absolute scandal. I think it's one of the biggest scandals in British history.
And when... Just briefly...
And with respect to Lorraine.
And just briefly, when the woman who spent 7 years compiling a report on child abuse, which included grooming, wasn't solely about that, interviewed something like 7,000 victims, says there's no point in having a national inquiry, just get on and do the recommendations that I've suggested. Does she not know more about it than you?
Well, why don't we do both, Fiona? Why don't we do both?
Well, she's saying a national inquiry is a waste of time.
Shouldn't we just get on and implement the recommendations? Don't we want action instead of a whole load more?
Woman in the... Hang on. I'll hear a bit more from the audience. Woman in the green top.
I take what you say, but the question is about Elon Musk. And it isn't necessarily about words and his opinion. He can spout forth as much as he likes. I agree with Lord Finkelstein, who said he's unhinged on, I think it was Any Questions the other day. But the point is, he has power. I think, Nadine, you referred to, his interest in space exploration and his satellites. As I understand it, he could have caused the Ukrainians to be totally trounced by the Russians at the beginning if he hadn't allowed them to use his satellites for their defence. He has that sort of power.
OK.
Aisha. And there's very little we can do about that.
Aisha. Friend or foe?
Or if anything.
I don't think he makes his interventions for good intentions. I think it is absolutely right to say we are talking about this because he is the sort of most followed man on the planet in terms of Twitter and he controls the algorithm. But let's look at what the kind of information is that he has promoted. Yes, he has talked about these grooming gangs and they are an absolute scandal. I want to say something about that in a moment. But look at who he's been promoting, right? Everyone in this room is disgusted by the wickedness that took on. Whatever background you are, everyone is disgusted about it. Many of us here want really big questions asked about what was happening in those communities. But who is he promoting? Now, the British public have a sense of fairness. They have a sense of injustice. We're all sickened by what's happened. But the British public is no fan of somebody like Tommy Robinson. And the person who Elon Musk has been promoting is Tommy Robinson. And that is not who we are as a society. So, and his attacks on Jess Phillips are absolutely disgusting. We've had 2 MPs murdered in recent times because of things getting really inflamed. 2 brilliant MPs, Conservative David Amos and Joe Cox from the Labour Party. So words do matter. Words have consequences in real life. And the attacks he made on Jess Phillips were absolutely disgraceful. He knows nothing about Jess Phillips, clearly. I don't think he knows that much about this country, actually, in terms of the stuff he's been tweeting. Because if he knew anything about Jess Phillips and the fact that she's dedicated her life to helping women and girls who've been abused, he would know that he's not fit to lick the boots of Jess Phillips.
All right. Let me move on.
I just want to say one other thing. I hear the anger in the room. I hear the anger from Liam. And I know Nadine herself has spoken very movingly about, abuse you have faced as well. Abuse against children is absolute disgrace. We know it happens in all different walks of life. We know it's happened in the Church of England. We know it's happened in the Catholic Church. Now, I am from a Muslim community, and I have been absolutely appalled at what has happened. And so many Muslims have been appalled. Now, of course, you have to look at this in the round, but you also do have to look. Something very dark happened in these towns across our country. And I, as a Muslim person, have got to face up to the fact something was happening in those communities. And most all good Muslims will think that as well. So we should ask further questions on this. We should have curious minds, open hearts, and we should prosecute this and ask more questions without fear or favour. But what we mustn't do is smear an entire group of people. We wouldn't say that all Catholics are paedophiles because of what's happened in the Catholic Church. We must not attack all Muslims because these disgusting, wicked animal men. And you know what? As well as white working class they also abused Muslim women. There's a lot of Muslim women, by the way, who want a bigger inquiry. Because guess what? If they weren't treating these white working class women very well, they were not treating Muslim women either. So I think we should look at this without fear or favour. I feel ashamed and I want to apologise to all those victims who've got... I spoke to a girl on my show, Samantha from Oldham. She was 12 years old. She was raped by 9 different men. Only 1 man got prosecuted. So I don't want to hear about politicians squabbling. I don't want to hear defensiveness from council leaders, from the police, from the social workers, from whoever, community leaders. Everyone's got to put their own defensiveness aside. The only people that matter here are the victims. It's still going on, by the way, and we have got to look into this.
All right. Thank you. Let's take another question now from Ellis Harris.
Government borrowing costs recently reached their highest level in over 25 years and there's limited economic growth. Is Labour's plan working?
Liam.
Well, I think it's fair to say that Labour inherited a bit of an economic mess. It certainly wasn't 1997 when national debt was just 35% of GDP. Labour inherited a situation where national debt was almost 100% of GDP and the tax burden was at a 70-year high. But having said that, trying to be even-handed about this as the sort of economics nerd on the panel, I have to say I do think Labour have made the economic situation worse. Firstly, as part of a kind of economic parlour game to talk down the economy and pretend there's a big hole in the public finances, as if you don't understand what's happening in the public finances if you're running the shadow cabinet. Of course you do. To pretend there was a £22 billion black hole in the public finances so you could then introduce tax rises that you didn't talk about in your manifesto ahead of an election, I thought was pretty sly and disingenuous. And most professional economists agree with me. If you talk down the economy when you are in office, guess what? Employers employ less, investors invest less. It's more important than being in opposition. And so the economy did start slowing, the figures now show, in August and September. We had 0% growth in September and October and just 0.1% growth in November. That number came out today. And the budget measures, I'm afraid, you should not be whacking taxes up even more when they're already at a 70-year high. It was Churchill who said somebody trying to generate prosperity by taxing more is like somebody standing in a bucket trying to pull themselves up. You cannot tax and spend and borrow your way to prosperity. And that is a lesson that Tony Blair and Gordon Brown understood, but Labour governments before that didn't understand it, and we ended up in big problems. My concern is that Keir Starmer's government is a lot more ideological than Blair's government when it comes to the economy. They want to tax and spend for the sake of increasing the size of the state. The bond markets are spooked because that does not generate growth. If you have growth, then growth solves lots of problems. You get more tax revenue at a given tax rate, you have less spending on benefits and so on. The public finances tend to fix themselves. When you don't have growth, but you're taxing as if you do have growth, then the public finances are pulled apart. That's why borrowing costs now are way, way higher than they were at the height of the mini-budget crisis. Even though the Bank of England is lowering interest rates, the markets are saying, no, we're keeping putting rates up. And you can say the bond markets are boring. This impacts your mortgages, personal loans, your companies trying to borrow in order to invest and generate more jobs. This is absolutely massive. I think it's we should be talking about it a lot more than we do. But when the Bank of England is trying to lower interest rates and the market's saying no, there aren't many lessons of history from economics, but one is clear. The market always wins. Right. That's the reality.
Aisha.
Well, look, there's no doubt that the economy's in a really difficult situation at the moment.
Do you think, as Liam says, Labour's making it worse?
I think we have to be realistic that the movements in the market are not because of Rachel Reeves. They have been international, and lots of economists have said that. But there's no doubt that this does make life much more difficult for Rachel Reeves. And I think there's a lot of anxiety at the moment in terms of what happens next. I do think, though...
Anxiety in the government?
Well, anxiety about the future of the economy, because people are worried about what lies ahead, because we're in a difficult situation. But I do think we have to be honest. I think sometimes, with some of the coverage just over the last couple of days, we sometimes do have a bit of collective amnesia. It was always going to be a difficult inheritance. But you cannot just wave a magic wand and erase, 14 years plus, actually going back to the financial crisis. You just can't come in 6 months and wave a magic wand and everything is going to be OK. But there are big, big challenges ahead for the Labour Party. I think in the budget there were some really important long-term decisions that needed to be taken. Sometimes we're very short-term in our politics. If we're going to get growth, we've got to change our planning laws, we've got to build more houses, and we've got to get going with some big infrastructure projects. But what I think there's an anxiety is that we are very much buffeted around by what happens in international affairs as well. Just look at the inflation crisis because of the Ukraine war. Look at what happened with COVID. And I think there is an anxiety that if there is more kind of turbulence and Rachel Reeves's headroom is reduced any further, what the anxiety will be is there going to be more tax raises? Now, she says she doesn't want to do that. That means will there be spending cuts? And I think that will be really, really difficult. There's so many services. We've just been discussing the NHS. We've just been discussing social care. There's so many services which are already cut to the bone. I don't think they could actually weather any more restrictions to public spending.
You don't sound massively confident.
Well, I'm just being...
in terms of what you think is in future for all of it.
I'm being honest. I think we have to be absolutely honest. This was a difficult inheritance. Let's not forget there were something like 4 chancellors in kind of recent succession. What this country needs in the Treasury is we need some stability, and we do need some tough long-term decisions like planning. If you want to really get growth going in this country, doing things like house building, housing is one of the biggest challenges facing this. But there's no quick fixes for any of this, and I think she's being honest with people about that.
All right. Man in this, right in the middle with the glass and the doubly sweater,
Liam, what's the answer then? You're telling us what she can't do and how it doesn't work. How does it work? There's no money.
The answer is to economic expansion, to get the economy moving, and you're not going to get...
What do you mean by that?
What I'm about to say, Fiona, if you'd allow me. Getting the economy moving, and I'm afraid you don't get the economy moving when you put an increase in employer national insurance contributions.
How are you going to do it?
I'm getting there.
No, what I'm saying, Liam, he wants you to get to the point a bit more quickly.
OK, thank you. Well, I want people to stop interrupting.
Well, crack on then.
OK. When you increase employer national insurance by 1.2% and then you sneakily lower the threshold to £5,000, people in the audience know that people are going to employ fewer people. There's going to be less tax revenue. I'm afraid when you whack up the minimum wage by 16% in one hit...
You've still not come to the things you would do.
You tell us what you told us.
The things you would do.
You just don't want to hear it. You destroy...
No, we do want to hear it.
We do want to hear it.
What's the answer? What's the answer? Not the negative.
You have to make the state smaller. That state has to get out of the way.
So is that public spending cuts? Is that what you mean?
This is
and it's
an infantile discussion. If you increase the...
Sorry, are you calling that member of the audience infantile?
No, I'm saying if you just... It's not about spending cuts, it's about getting the economy growing, and then you can sustain more government spending. You get the economy growing by taxing it less.
OK. All right, well, look, in fairness...
It takes time.
Liam, he gave us his answer, by taxing less. That's your view. Calum?
So the challenge we have, as Liam is correct in saying, is that the budget has done nothing to promote growth. And what I hear when I'm speaking to businesses in my part of the world, they are being clobbered from every side. They don't see a way in which they're going to be able to develop, to grow, to create new jobs. One of the biggest barriers to that is a self-inflicted one, because we have deliberately cut off our access to our biggest market, the European Union. I'm happy to answer the gentleman's question and say that the solution to growth is having a much deeper and tighter relationship with the European Union over the next 5 years, so that we can get back to a position where businesses like those in my constituency are not tripping over the new red tape that is stopping them trading back and forth with the European Union, adding costs to their businesses and preventing them from growing. And we hear far too often from opposition politicians from the Conservative and Reform Party that we should be seeking trade deals in India and the Pacific area. It's thousands of miles from us. The European Union is on our doorstep.
I mean,
we do 40% of our trade with them.
Obviously,
it's just obvious that that's this opportunity we should be taking as a country.
People voted to leave the European Union. I mean, that was whether you agree with this or not, that was a democratic choice. And actually, particularly here in this part of the world, they voted significantly to leave the EU. But
people voted,
is that what you're saying?
Not at all. People voted to leave the European Union, and that decision needs to be respected. But there are ways of leaving the European Union, and there are relationships we can choose to have with the European Union. The last Conservative government went for the hardest form of departure. They botched the negotiations. They came up with deals that carved up the UK and Britain, Northern Ireland in divisive ways, and they didn't think about what was going to be best for growth in the future. I think many people, when I speak to them, are saying, we recognise that there are real opportunities there. There's a sort of almost ideological opposition to anything with the European word in it, whether that's European air traffic control or the European pharmaceuticals regulator, things that could bring real benefit if we harmonised. So it's not about going back into the European Union. It's about having a constructive and deep relationship and getting on with that. And that's all the more important when Donald Trump is threatening us from the other side of the Atlantic. We have neighbours on our doorstep who want to have a deeper and richer relationship with us, and this Labour government should get on with it.
OK. Nadine, Ellis's question... looking at borrowing costs and limited economic growth, is Labour's economic plan working?
No. And I don't know if you remember, but during the general election, Rachel Reeves talked a lot about growth and how she was going to deliver growth. And in fact, her and Keir Starmer talked about it endlessly. And then she came into Westminster and killed growth stone dead with her budget. They talked the economy down from the day they came to power, talked it down, which made investors very nervous. The cost of our borrowings, our interest rates on our borrowings rocketed. I think she brought 150 million in from her trip to China, which was a drop in the ocean compared to the billions we paid out that week just in interest payments alone.
It was just out of interest, it was 600 million over 5 years.
The markets were from China.
From China?
Yes. Okay,
We're spending more on debt interest than we do on schools each year.
And hospitals. No, Liam, schools and hospitals, I believe. More are interest payments on our debt.
Schools.
And to think that the issue I have is not the question you put to Liam, which is how do we get growth? And there are lots of ways to get growth. Does anybody remember Margaret Thatcher's enterprise allowance scheme and the entire generation of small businesses that were bred across the country? There are lots of ways to bring in growth. But when you talk down an economy, when you have no plan, when there is no hope from this government at the moment, and I'll tell you exactly what is going to happen. The OBR is going to downgrade or revise its 2% growth predictions that it made. And what that does is change the entire modelling on which the economy has been based in the last budget. And as sure as eggs are eggs, Rachel Reeves will be back to the dispatch box in the spring. It won't be called a budget, it'll be called an announcement, spring statement, and she's going to have to raise taxes again. And we are now entering that economic doom loop that we do with every socialist ideological government. It's going to be taxing more, more on public spending. And the one thing she should have done, and the thing Liz Truss didn't do, actually, when she came into power as well, was we cannot continue to keep funding public services to the extent that we are without some kind of reform. She's going to have to either, and she will slash public spending. She's going to have to. She won't want to do that because Labour governments don't like doing that, but that is going to have to happen.
Hang on, Aisha, just wait 1 minute. Aisha, I just want to make a point. Aisha, just let me make this point. You talk, Nadine, about Labour or the government having no growth and no plan. So the Conservative leader today, Kemi Badenoch, has also been apologising for the Conservatives having no growth and no plan on a couple of areas. I just wanted your view, because you were in government at the time. She said, we announced that we would leave the European Union before we had a plan for growth outside the EU. She said, we made it law we deliver net zero by 2050, and only then did we start thinking about how we'd actually do that. So you're criticising Labour having no growth, no plan. You've got your Conservative leader saying you guys didn't have it either.
Neither of those statements were true. So that's all I can say about that.
Kemi is saying is not
look,
true.
I don't want to attack Kemi Badenoch. She's a new leader, and I don't want to attack her.
Well, you have already, actually, because you said you said she's not working.
Yeah. So look.
So do you want to just tell us what you mean by that?
Look, I'm a lawyer. I will die a conservative. I believe totally in the principles of freedom, liberty, opportunity of the Conservative Party, and they run through my veins.
But you don't think Kemi Badenoch is making a good job of it?
Well, do you know, if you want to talk about leadership in the UK,
I want to ask what you said. Kemi's not working.
I
just wonder if you could tell everyone what you mean by that.
We've fallen back to, I think, the third party in the polling at the moment, and Reform is polling ahead of us. It's not working. You know, it just is. The Conservative Party is the longest standing, the greatest party in politics, as far as I'm concerned. The most successful, certainly.
Do you think there should be a change in leadership quickly?
Look, give her time. Kemi needs time to bed in. She's a new leader. But what we do need are some policies. That's what we need.
Well, here we have a member of the government here. So, Chris, I'll come to you right at the end. This is a question about Labour. Is Labour's plan working?
It's not working yet, but it needs to, and it will. We had to do two things when we were elected, you know. And everybody admits that there was a shocking inheritance that we received economically.
We were the fastest growing economy in the G7 the day you won the election.
For that quarter.
Well, that was the sunny uplands, Fiona. They were the green shoots of recovery.
Can we talk about what policies we should do, please, rather than all these political parlour games? That's what the country wants.
Really?
We had to do two things when we were elected. The first was fix our public services, because we all know that so many things in this country simply didn't work. We didn't even have enough prisons to put the prisoners in that we wanted to arrest and send to prison. We had a massive backlog in the NHS. We didn't fix the potholes. We didn't have enough homes for people to live in. Our railways were a mess. All of these things were a problem, and we had to get people, for instance, in the NHS back to work. So we had to stop the strikes in our schools and in our hospitals. That was one thing we had to do. But the other thing we had to do was we had to make the sums add up. One of the things I've found as a government minister that is absolutely shocking, as we go through our budget, what we're doing at the moment, we're going through line by line of every single aspect of our government spending, is there hadn't been a review of spending in departments line by line for more than 6 years.
That's not true. That's not true. I was in Cabinet and I did it with my department. That's simply not true. We had a huge spending review.
You had a long time to talk, Nadine. Could you just let me say a couple of things?
But, Chris, that's not true.
Nadine, seriously, there was no 3-year spending review done by government for many, many years. And that's one of the problems, that when we came into power, seriously, we found in lots of departments, people had made announcements, but they hadn't put the money aside to pay for them. And that's the second part. Of course, we can't spend more money than we've got. And I hear the answer that Liam's answer and Nadine's answer is basically another round of austerity in this country. It's another round of cuts to the... Liam,
the gap in the public finances...
Liam, am I ever allowed to finish
Well, you interrupted me, Chris.
I didn't.
Well, hang on. We've got 30 seconds left.
There you go.
Do you want to finish in 30 seconds?
Look, I think we need to grow the economy. Of course we do. Tomorrow I will be helping launch the creative industries, because one in council with 1 in 14 people in this country now work in the creative industries. If we're going to grow the economy, we're going to be relying on some of the sectors that we haven't historically in the past. We launched an AI opportunities plan earlier on this week, another area of growth with dramatic amounts of extra investment into the UK economy. Those are the kind of things that we need to be working on. But the idea that another round of austerity to undermine further our public services in this country would deliver growth in this country, frankly, is for the birds.
Right. Well, I know you want to come back in, and I know you want to come back in. We're out of time, I'm afraid. So forgive me, all of those who got your hands up and I didn't get around to you. I apologise. Oh, my goodness. This is just the first programme after Christmas. Well, that's going to be like the rest of the year. Right, thank you very much to our panel. Thank you, of course, to the audience here. Great to see you, and thank you for putting your questions. Thank you very much to you at home for watching. Remember, we're in Stockport and then in Melton Mowbray after that, so do apply if you want to be part of the audience. For now, from Question Time Northampton. Bye-bye.
time,